They rise to the rhythm of the waves, lie lulled by their undulating music, live their lives on the vast expanse of golden sands. This is the story of an unsung fraternity of young people of Kolavipalam, a sleepy village in the banks of the Arabian Sea, 30 kilometers north of the city of Calicut in Kerala. They pursue different vocations. Surendra Babu, a member of the fraternity, drives a rented auto rickshaw. His vehicle plying on the streets of Payoli town is a familiar sight. Satishan teaches English to the children of his locality at a tutorial. Dinesh Babu has earned a name for himself as a consummate electrician in the Kolavipalam neighborhood. Braving the vagaries of the deep waters, this trio comprising Vijayan, Rameshan and Sajeevan ventures into the sprawling sea to earn their livelihood. For these youngsters of Kolavipalam, life never goes like a breeze. It is a struggle for survival all the way. But that doesn't daunt them from coming together to pursue a unique passion, bereft of personal benefits. Come September, they join hands for the protection of sea turtles belonging to the endangered olive ridley species. The Thiram Prakriti Samrakshana Samiti, as they have named their fraternity, enjoys wide support and participation of the local community. The 3-kilometer-long beach of Kolavipalam is close to the estuary of the Iringil River, an ecological niche. The estuary is one of the nesting grounds for olive ridleys, the smallest of the marine turtles seen in the Indian seas. The four other sea turtle species are the hawksbill, the green turtle, the leatherback, and the loggerhead. Barring loggerhead, all the species are known to nest in India. The olive ridley is the most common variety of marine turtles found on the mainland coasts of India. During the breeding season, extending from September to March, males and females migrate from their feeding zone to the breeding zone, which may be thousands of kilometers apart. Mating occurs in the offshore waters of the breeding ground, and the females then come ashore to nest. The largest nesting grounds in India are along the east coast. Orissa coast in particular witnesses mass nesting by thousands of turtles. These dome-shelled mother turtles quietly crawl ashore during night to deliver their precious burden of eggs. They use their broad flippers to dig flask-shaped nests about 1.5 feet deep. In each clutch, they lay about 100 to 150 eggs. The eggs, weighing 35 grams on an average, are almost spherical and comparable to table tennis balls in size. They take utmost care to protect the eggs from predators. For that, they cover the pit with sand using their broad flippers. For further safety, they repeatedly hammer the surface with their bodies. Before sunrise, they trudge back to the sea, hoping that their eggs would be secure in the womb of Mother Earth. However, only a tiny portion of these eggs survive, as most succumb to sea and land predators, human interference, and other natural hostilities. But in Kolavipalam, the case is different. Here the eggs are safe for hatching, thanks to the fraternity of the youth lovingly called the Friends of Turtles. The turtle preservation program began out of sheer curiosity, aroused by a news report. Later on, it was realized that the sea turtle is a vital link in the marine ecosystem. This knowledge provided further impetus for preservation activities. Every September, the activities begin with the construction of hatcheries for keeping the eggs secure. The Kerala State Forest Department provides raw materials for construction purposes. At different locations on the beach, hatcheries are erected along with thatched roof shelters for keeping vigil. Over the years, the preservation program has evolved into a mass movement, enlisting active participation from different sections of the society. Before the launching of the program in 1992, most of the eggs were being destroyed by men or non-human predators. What brought us together for the protection activities is the knowledge that the olive ridley turtle is an endangered species facing extinction. The preservation program is a long-drawn, planned activity lasting 5 to 6 months. Every night, they assemble near the hatchery and break up into groups for scouting the shore. Sometimes, they succeed in collecting the eggs in the night itself. As it is difficult to spot the place in the night where turtles have laid the eggs, they search the shore in the mornings. Usually they proceed taking their cue from the marks of the flippers left on the sand and zero in on the exact spot using a pole. The unearthing of the eggs requires utmost caution, as the slightest fumbling could break the eggs. The eggs thus collected are then transferred to the hatchery. Artificial nests, identical in all aspects to the original ones, are dug out for keeping eggs. Besides providing ideal conditions for incubation, the hatchery with its strong bamboo fencing protects the eggs from predators like stray dogs, jackals, and mongooses. Each batch of eggs is kept in separate nests, marked with corresponding date. In about 45 to 50 days after being deposited under sand, the eggs hatch. Little turtles spring up to life, freeing themselves from the sandy womb, each tiny turtle jostling with the other to reach out for the first ray of life. Attending to the silent birth pangs of these little ones, These youngsters stay awake throughout the night. The average carapace length of this tiny turtle is only 46 millimeters, while a fully grown olive ridley attains an average length of 70 centimeters to 1 meter. Unveiling the surrounding darkness, they swim frantically out towards the sea, maybe out of a natural instinct. If hatching occurs during daytime, the hatchlings are kept until evening and then released into the sea. Once they attain maturity, they are believed to return to the same breeding zone for nesting. During 1998-99, 53 turtles came for breeding and about 4,500 eggs were collected. Out of these, nearly 3,880 eggs hatched. This year, the number of turtles went up to 63 and nearly 5,700 eggs have been collected so far. After a few years, this shore could receive hundreds of mother turtles into its lap for maternity. But the existence of the coast itself is questioned due to illegal sand mining at the nearby estuary. The mining goes on unabated even after prohibitory orders from the court. The sea turtle's existence is further endangered by excessive trawling along the coast. This turtle, for instance, came ashore with a grievous head injury, probably caused by the propeller of a trawling boat. Lucky it was to come to the right place and into the right hands, which take great care in nursing and protecting turtles. Their efforts have also helped arouse public interest in conserving the coastal ecosystem. The number of turtles visiting Kolave to nest is increasing every year. But will the young ones grow up and return to the same shore like their mothers? And when they come, will the shore be there to receive them into its bosom?
Hello and welcome to the session on Translation Service. Translation is the process of converting the document from one language to another language. It is the process of rendering what is expressed in one language by means of another language. Or, translation is the communication of the meaning of a source language text by means of an equivalent target language text. Translation is a solution to language barrier of communication. Translation began only after the appearance of written literature. The rise of the Internet has fostered a worldwide market for translation services and has facilitated language localization. Presently, there is a discipline called translation studies. Translation studies deal with the systematic study of the theory, the description, and the application of translation. Definitions. According to Random House Dictionary, translation is the turn something written or spoken from one language into another. Webster's New International Dictionary defines translation as to turn into one's own or another language. Need and importance of translation service. One of the main characteristic features of the modern science is said to be its international nature. Developments and results of scientific and research activities are nowadays published in large number of periodicals in different languages. Latin, German, and French were the most important languages of science and technology till the 19th century. However, English has now replaced them as the prominent language of scientific communication. Several studies have been conducted in this matter, and it is found that around 60% of scientific literature is published in English language, and the rest 40% is published in other languages. In this case, the English-speaking people are missing the 40% of scientific literature, and people from non-English background are missing the majority of scientific literature. The solution to this problem is translation service. Objectives of translation service. Some of the main objectives of translation service are as follows: to provide document in user language, to save of the researchers, scientists, and other scholars, to promote the use of documents, to promote cultural understanding, establishment of cooperation and coordination among international organizations and agencies. Even though translation is a solution to language barrier, translation has its own problems. Problems of translation: multiplicity of languages, lack of bibliographical control of translations already made, lack of expertise among translators, lack of proper standardization of technical terminology, and high cost. Types of translation service. Translation may be of the following three types. Cover-to-cover translation. It is the complete translation of a document. Cover-to-cover translation service is an anticipatory service because it is done in anticipation of use. Selective translation. It is the translation of the part of a document. Content translation. It is the translation of the content of a document. Translation service is rendered by different centers and agencies. They are translation centers and in-house translation centers of government departments, private translation services, online translation services, and translation software. Translation center. Translation centers perform the following functions: undertake translation work on demand as well as in anticipation using experts, serve as a translation pool for the work, maintain a panel of translators in various fields, arrange procurement of translation from outside the country, obtain indexing and abstracting services relating to the translations available anywhere in the world. Prominent translation centers. Let us study some of the prominent translation centers. The National Translation Center, NTC. The NTC was formally organized in 1953 after having existed for several years as a voluntary project of the Science Technology Division of the Special Library Association, SLA. The NTC was located at the John Crerar Library, Chicago. NTC was closed in 1993. It was a depository and information source for unpublished translations into English from world literature of the natural, physical, medical, and social science. Since its inception, it had published a number of indexes listing its own holdings as well as translations from other sources. Some of them were Author List of Translations, Bibliography of Translations, Translation Monthly, Technical Translations, and Consolidated Index of Translations into English. The International Translation Center, ITC. The center was established in 1960 under its former name, the European Translation Center. The present name was assumed in 1975. It is located in the Technological University at Delft, Netherlands. The center was established largely as a result of a wide scheme of voluntary cooperation among Western European countries, stimulated by the US and guided by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Its general aim was to act as an instrument for the exchange of information by means of translations and prevention of duplication of translation work. ITC does not prepare translation work itself. Its main function is to keep a central reference catalog and run as a information bureau which handles requests for and information on translations. Translation services in India. Several government and public sector organizations are there in India who are actively engaged in in-house translation work. They are NISCAIR, IASLIC, NCERT, NBT, and others. We can have a brief description of translation services of some of these organizations. NISCAIR services. National Institute of Science, Communication and Information Resources, NISCAIR, New Delhi, has been organizing translation service for all organizations and individuals. NISCAIR receives translation orders and documents in all foreign languages and carries out the translation work in the required language on prescribed rate. The rate varies from language to language. NISCAIR provides translation of science and technology documents from 20 foreign languages into English. The languages include Chinese, Czech, Danish, Dutch, French, German, Hungarian, Italian, Japanese, Norwegian, Polish, Portuguese, Romanian, Russian, Serbo-Croatian, Spanish, Swedish, etc. The clients include national laboratories, science and technology institutes, and research and development organizations, corporate and public sector undertakings, universities, research scholars, etc. NISCAIR provides reverse translation, English into foreign languages also. Translation of English text of maximum of 1 page into French, German, Russian, and Spanish is undertaken. Translation of full English documents into Japanese is undertaken. Rate of translation service at NISCAIR. From European languages to English, rupees 150 per page. From Chinese and Japanese to English, rupees 220 per page. From English to any European language, rupees 260 per page. From English to Chinese and Japanese, rupees 330 per page. IASLIC services. IASLIC has a separate translation section. This section provides translations of documents along with all their bibliographic details such as author, title, volume number, page numbers, year of publication, and language in which the matter is translated. IASLIC renders translation services from French, German, Russian, Chinese, Japanese, Spanish, and Portuguese into English. It also provides English translations of the documents written in Bengali language. Other Indian organizations. NCERT, National Council of Educational Research, Training. NBT, National Book Trust. SCERT, State Council of Educational Research, Training. Indian Statistical Institute, ISI, Calcutta, and Indian Science Institute, Bengaluru, have been rendering limited translation service to various Indian languages. Private, international, and national translation agencies. There are a number of private, international, and national translation agencies. Let's discuss some of them. SciVi Translation Service. SciVi Translation Service is one of the well-known international professional translation services. The company provides a wide range of translation in all Asian and European languages. The following are the translation services of the company. Business and Finance Translation Service. The company provides clients with business and finance translation services, such as advertising details, commercial letters, company brochures, company product presentation, stock exchange notices, proposals, correspondence, annual reports, finance and insurance, market review and analysis, etc. Legal Translation Service. The company offers legal translation service of various legal formalities and documents into different languages, which includes legal contracts, patents, trademarks, copyrights, taxation and customs, legal correspondence, sales contracts, certificates, tenders, and appeals. Medical translation service. The company provides medical translation service in the following medical fields. They are cardiology, dentistry, healthcare, medical instruments, pharmaceutical clinical studies, etc. Patent translation service. The company provides translations of patents of US patents, Japanese patents, European patents, Chinese patents, etc. Website translation service. The company's translators enter directly in the source of the client's website files and do the work. Translation Services International, TSI. Translation Service International is popularly known in its abbreviation TSI, which is a US-based international translation agency. The philosophy of TSI is to support companies competing in global markets by providing fast, accurate, cost-effective translations of documents, films, and videos. Services of the company. Advertisement translation. Videos or films translation. Videos and films present similar challenges for translation. The company provides voiceover, dubbing, subtitling, and on-screen graphic translations. Website localization. Many companies are localizing their websites in order to maximize their global business potential. The company gives this service to the clients. Indian-based private translation agencies. Modelingua Learning Private Limited. Modelingua Learning Private Limited is a pioneer language consultancy services in India. It specializes in translation and interpretation services and provides a range of foreign as well as Indian language related services. Modelingua started its operation in 1999. The company specializes in translation and localization services in Indian as well as foreign languages. The Indian languages including Bengali, Hindi, Gujarati, Tamil, Kannada, Marathi, Telugu, Malayalam, Punjabi, Oriya, Sanskrit and Urdu. And foreign languages include Nepali, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, German, Russian, Arabic, Persian, Chinese and Japanese. Indian Translators. Indian Translators is a leading translation company of India. The services of the company are software localization, technical translation, and web globalization. The company provides 4 types of translation services. Just translation. Documents are translated and someone skims through it to see if there is any blunder. Normal translation. Documents are first translated and then proofread to remove typos and errors. Advanced translation. Documents are first translated, they are then sent for error checking. All the errors are corrected. Zero error translation. Documents are sent for translation to 2 different translators. Then the translations are matched. All differences are checked and the final translation is carried out by eliminating all errors. Online translation. Online translation is a translation service available on the internet. In this case, if there is net connection, getting translated copy is very easy. In the case of online translation, here there is no need of installing software in our system. Google Translate is the best example of online translation service. Google Translate is a free translation service that provides instant translations between dozens of different languages. It can translate words, sentences, and web pages between any combination of supported languages. Google does not translate from one language to another, that is L1 to L2, but often translates first to English and then to the target language, that is L1 to English, then to L2. Google Translate supports 71 national and international languages. There are 2 separate boxes for Google Translate. First of all, we have to select source language and target language. Then type the document in the source language box. Automatically, the result will be coming in the next box. Google Translate, like other automatic translation tools, has its limitations. While it can help the reader to understand the general content of a foreign language text, it does not always deliver accurate translations. Some languages produce better results than others. Google Translate performs well, especially when English is the target language and the source language is one of the languages of the European Union. Google Translate does not apply grammatical rules since its algorithms are based on statistical analysis rather than traditional rule-based analysis. Translation software. Translation software is a special computer programs made for translation work. In this case, an exclusive application software package is to be either downloaded or copied from any other sources and installed in your system. Babylon is the best example of translation software. Babylon is a computer dictionary and translation software developed by Babylon Limited. The company was established in 1997. Babylon Translator is a free downloadable software and provides translations in over 77 languages. The translator works both online and offline, delivering instant. With just the simple click of a mouse, the requested translation will instantly appear. Babylon's unique desktop tool was developed using OCR, Optical Character Recognition, an innovative technology that enables the system to identify both the term you want to translate as well as the text surrounding it. What this means is that the software is able to provide contextual translations with an unmatched level of accuracy. In addition to its well-known translation products, Babylon offers a variety of language solutions. Products include professional translation for all of your official documents, mobile apps for smartphones, and instant grammar correction to assist in writing. Let me summarize the session. Translation service is an important information service provided by information centers. It eliminates the language barriers of information communication. Translation service serves as a bridge between two languages. Recent technological advancements have influenced greatly on translation service. The result of this advancement is emergence of online translation services. These types of machine-aided translation service has its own limitations, such as grammatical problems, homonym problems, contextual meaning problems, etc. Because translation service is a mental process. So manual translation is the best and advisable method of translation than machine translation. Now you can try to answer the questions given here. What is translation? What are the problems of translation? What is translation pool? Write one example. Select any organization and point out their translation service. Hope that you may go through these reference books for further understanding. Documentation and Information, Service Techniques and Systems, written by B. Guha in 1983, published by World Press Private Limited, Calcutta. Information Sources and Services, Theory and Practice, written by Kumar, PSG, in 2004, published by BIA Publishing Corporations, New Delhi. Thank you for watching this program. We can meet again with another topic. Till then, take care.
Today we have Professor Kamalesh Kar, a very senior distinguished nuclear physicist and professor from Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics, Calcutta. Professor Kar did his PhD from Rochester University and joined the Saha Institute in mid-80s. Since then he has been very active in various aspects of nuclear physics research. He is one of the leading nuclear physics members of this country and is well known internationally. He is having several collaborations with several outside scientists. Recently he had been to Spain in connection with his collaboration work, and when I asked him to come over here, he immediately agreed to come and talk a few lines about his current activities. Professor Carr, I would first like to ask you, nuclear physics had been there for almost more than 100 years. What is the current state of nuclear physics research in world particularly and in general in India? Can you please highlight that?
Yes, nuclear physics is of course there as a physics subject for a long time, and after the Second World War, of course, nuclear physics became very popular. In the 50s and 60s, many aspects, important nuclear physics aspects were discussed, and there are many important findings were made, and there are centers like Niels Bohr Institute and also many centers like MIT and other universities in USA which contributed a lot. Now nuclear physics after that went through some evolution, and nowadays there are certain specific areas where nuclear physics is concentrating. Some of the areas is like something called exotic nuclei, that means nuclei which are not stable at all, highly unstable, but which have a lot of a nucleus is made of a proton and a neutron, and these nuclei have a large number of neutrons and much smaller number of protons, but still are stable for a very short period of time. I mean, they decay very quickly, but there are challenging experiments being done to study their properties, and because this is very important in nuclear astrophysics. That's another area which is developing very well. In nuclear astrophysics, the challenging problems are how stars are formed, how they continue to burn, and finally, after long billions of years, how they die. So this has input, though it's not very clear that how, to a layman it looks the largest things are getting connected to the smallest things, which are nuclei. Largest things are the stars. Nuclei have the size of 10 to the power minus 13 centimeter, but this large and the small get connected, and the properties of nuclei in some way control or give a lot of input to the large evolution of stars, of the making of the universe in the early stages, about the properties of the neutrons and the protons become important. So that's a very important activity, nuclear astrophysics and nuclei which were not studied earlier, which are exotic and which are highly unstable, but which are very important not only as to understand the specific nuclei, but also in their applications to understand the whole world.
Now coming back to the statement you made, exotic nuclei. As you know, most of these exotic nuclei are very short-lived, and if we want to produce, as I understand, we need to have the radioactive ion beams, particularly those nuclei which are quite far away from the line of stability. So if you want to produce these radioactive ion beams, already the Western Hemisphere is going with good speed, and Oak Ridge has got the facility, and MSU also I understand has the facility. What are the attempts that are made in India, and how far we are in comparison to our brothers in the US and European countries?
Yes, surely USA, Europe as well as Japan are way ahead of us in this field. So, but this being a very important field, as you mentioned, we need to catch up. So there are two possibilities. One is collaboration, which is going on. I know many of my colleagues from Variable Energy Cyclotron Center used to go to the RIKEN facility in Japan, and they learnt a lot, and many of the persons from Japan used to come, and similarly from USA and Europe, lot of the experimental physicists came and gave very important input to the Indian community. and the second method is to develop homegrown facilities. There are attempts for that, like Variable Energy Cyclotron Center is working towards a machine. They have made quite a lot of progress, and in the next 5-year plan and in the coming 5 to 10 years, I think many of these Indian nuclear physicists will come together and try to look at get facilities closer to the international competitive ones, and try to make some dent in that area with our homegrown experimental results.
So, we do have to have a lot of experimental facilities, including sophisticated instrumentation. For example, if you, as you already know, gamma sphere is a very powerful tool for the gamma spectroscopy work, and similarly charged particle ball, which is again was developed at Berkeley. Are there any attempts to build that kind of multi-detector arrays within India, either on collaborative basis or on indigenous basis? Is there any attempt going on there?
Yes, actually the nuclear experimentalist, the community of the few research institutes and universities, they have come together in the last few years, something called the INGA collaboration, where people from my own institute, Saha Institute, Variable Energy Cyclotron Center, TIFR, and some people from BRC, as well as from the IUAC, Inter-University Accelerator Center. They have put their gamma ray, they have actually gone for a Indian gamma ray array, which I don't remember the exact number, I think 22 of them were put together. So the idea was to have a 4 pi geometry and to have something closer to the gamma sphere, as you mentioned, so that the Indian homegrown results become at least comparable to what you are able to do abroad. So we have to make still some progress in that, but there are efforts already on towards that goal.
So how is the general feedback in setting up these facilities from the, ultimately the students have to come forward, and how is the general trend with the onset of the IT revolution in India? Are we able to really get good students who are dedicated to spend time on the development of these experimental facilities? Because experimental facilities development takes a lot of time and it requires a lot of patience, and many a time you don't have any publications for years together. So what is your advice, and how do we go about to solve this problem?
Yes, getting students of course is one of the most important aspects, and overall in physics, as you mentioned, IT was an attractive professional line for the young minds, and many of them went that way. And also because the difference in large difference in the pay packets you get in the research world and in the IT world. So there was of course a depletion of the good students from research to other areas. But I think generally the university, the community and the government, I would say, also has become aware of that, and so there are now many schemes to attract good students, to give them better scholarships to start with, and better job opportunities in future, and which of course has to improve to keep pace with other areas. But overall, I think compared to, let's say, 5 or 7 years ago, there is a tendency of some of the bright students to come to different fields of physics. But then there is again competition between different fields, like condensed matter experiments and theory is also an attractive area. Nuclear physics, we are trying to project that it is a very attractive area, and similarly high energy physics, both experiment and theory, is a very attractive area. Even a layman now knows about the great experiment that is going on in CERN, so they get attracted towards doing that. So one should always try to really go to the student at the BSc, MSc level. Research institute, universities should work hard to give attractive talks, make the courses attractive to the students, so that we get more and more bright students coming to nuclear physics, because there are many challenges in the research world that they will get, which will be intellectually satisfying to them compared to many other job areas.
In this context, I would like to ask you, can you specifically tell a few challenging topics which the students can pursue, if not financially satisfying their academic complexes?
Okay, some of the, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, nuclear astrophysics is one area which is really growing very well, where you need input from nuclear physics to solve some of the problems that you encounter. Like the way, let's say, if you look at the nuclei, look at the elements that were formed, we still sometimes do not know what are the ways the elements, the heavier elements got formed. You see, even there are debates going on about the actual sites of something called the R process nucleosynthesis. So whether it was in a star going through supernova explosion, that you need to understand how elements are produced in this universe, what was the basic sites where they were first produced, and how do they you have to look at their abundances right now, which we observe in the solar complex or in the other stars, and how we can. So when you do some sort of a nuclear physics input, that also has to explain eventually the observed solar abundances and other abundances of metals and non-metals. So as a result, this is again a challenging area where nuclear physics is very important. Another area I can mention is the death of large stars. When you look at the sky, we look at stars, but we do not know that some of these stars are at different stages of their evolution. Some of these stars are new ones. Some of the stars are like the sun, which is burning the hydrogen to helium mostly, but there may be some stars which are there for a long period of time and which is nearing its lifetime. That means it is the burning of the nuclear fuel is nearing completion. So those stars, if they are large enough, they often decay, I mean that they often explode in a very violent way called supernova explosions. Now in the last 50-70 years, scientists, physicists, astrophysicists, they were trying to understand this explosion from basic physics, from the physics that we know in our classrooms. There have been spectacular advances in that, but still there are certain areas which we are not able to really make agreement with the observed values, like observed values of the energy of the explosion that you can see in the sky, and you can estimate that sort of thing. When you simulate in your computer, you do not match the values exactly, but overall the process, what is taking place, lot of things are known. So these are things where with a computer, with some nuclear physics input from the laboratory, and with a paper and a pencil, you can actually understand some of the key mysteries of the universe, and that's where nuclear physics becomes so important.
Can you also tell us a few lines on the importance of neutrino oscillations and why it is challenging to undertake such a study?
Yeah, this neutrino is a particle which comes in something called a beta decay. You know of students all learn about radioactivity in their BSc or even high school days. Radioactivity, there are three kinds: alpha decay, beta decay, and gamma decay. Now this beta decay transform one nucleus, this is a nuclear physics effect, transform one nucleus to another nucleus, giving electron or a positron and emitting some particles which have no charge and which are supposed to have no mass as well. That's what when Pauli in 1930 postulated them, and then in 1956 when they are detected in experiments, they were supposed to have no mass. But recently, through again something called a solar neutrino puzzle or solar neutrino deficit problem, people have found out that the neutrinos that are supposed to come from the sun, their number that we observe is lower, and doing again detailed experiment finally in the Sudbury Neutrino Observatory in Canada in 2002 onwards, one is able to find out there is something called neutrino oscillations, which transform something these electron type neutrinos that we are discussing to something called the mu type neutrinos or the tau type neutrinos. And this is known as neutrino oscillations, and for this to happen, at least one of these neutrinos must have a non-zero mass, and that also is revolutionizing our idea of nuclear and particle physics. And this is something called going beyond the standard model. And so the neutrino oscillation detection has become important for many reasons, to understand the neutrino oscillation, to understand something called CP violation in high energy physics, to understand the evolution in the early universe. So many of the countries in Europe, also USA, are with a lot of vigor are doing neutrino oscillation experiments, catching neutrinos. There are two things. One is that neutrinos of the muon type get produced in the atmosphere, so you can catch the atmospheric neutrinos and observe neutrino oscillation. That is one thing which we are planning to do in India. There is something called the India based Neutrino Observatory, or INO, which is a mega project which will hopefully soon get funded by the government of India, and which will there will be an underground observatory near Madurai. There will be a tunnel which will go and will have the observatory underground. This will be the first major underground observatory after the Kohler field experiments in Mysore, where again lot of interesting properties of neutrinos were seen, but that observatory is no more. So we have to build a new one which will be near Madurai. West Pori Hills is the place, and we hope to maybe 5 years from now get some results on this experiment and really analyze atmospheric neutrinos and understand neutrino oscillations. The other thing that is being done is something called the long baseline experiments, where from reactors or specific high energy neutrino facility, neutrinos come out, and the neutrino detectors may be a few hundred kilometers away or maybe even 1,000 kilometers away. You can detect those neutrinos and see how much they have oscillated. These again, these short and long baseline neutrino experiments, many of them are proposed, some of them are already on, and if INO actually becomes a reality, then in a sort of long term future, we also would like to get neutrinos from some sources like CERN in future or some other facility if it develops, and try to also do these baseline experiments. That will of course be a long baseline experiment.
Professor Carr, can you please give a few more details on the Indian Neutrino Observatory coming up at Teni, and what are the various problems that have to be solved, and what are the various problems which we are likely to encounter both from the academic point of view as well as from the administrative point of view?
Yes, this India based Neutrino Observatory, or INO, which is I mentioned earlier, it's the tunnel has to be there. This tunnel will lead to a hall which will be the seat of the first neutrino experiment in India. It is in the district of Teni, so basically all the required permissions like environment clearance and forest clearance, all those has been obtained for this site. They are all available with us. The only thing is that now the state government has to give permission to use the land for making the construction. So once the land is allotted, Department of Atomic Energy is already in their Atomic Energy Commission meetings. In the next meeting, hopefully they will discuss about this and try to allocate funds. So once the land comes, then the construction will start. Construction will be a 2-kilometer tunnel that will lead to a big hall, which will have the experiment is basically it will have to start with about 30 to 40 kilotons of iron. That is module 1, which itself is a detector. It will be magnetized, and that magnetized iron will be able to detect with electronics in between, to detect these atmospheric neutrinos that are always coming from our atmosphere in all directions. So that will so the experiment hopefully will start after the construction and putting in of the iron into the chamber, the cavern. And so, as I said, maybe within if things go on fine, maybe in 4 or 5 years we will start having our own neutrino observatory, detecting data, and in a couple of years time we will be able to look at the atmospheric neutrino oscillations, the oscillation parameters like what I told you about the mass of the neutrino. So it will throw light on that, how much of neutrinos oscillation angle, and so this will be able to then compete with the other experiments that are already going on in USA as well as in other countries.
Okay. Then I will ask you a couple of more general questions. One is, what is your advice to the students who wants to pursue physics as career or for their career?
Yeah, I think the main thing, the basic thing is that a student who wants to do research should have confidence in himself that I am able to do something, and that once you have confidence in yourself, that half the battle is already won, because you here now it is an international competition. It's not just your village or your city or your country. So physics or any branch of science is universal. The same Newton's law of motion you are taught in Indian high schools, in Europe, in USA. So you are learning, and now with all sorts of facilities, you are learning almost at par with the international students. So students should not get scared. They should know that Indian students actually are one of the brightest internationally, and they should really come up, have confidence, and look at challenging problems and try to solve them. And we have seen already in maths Olympiads, physics Olympiads, Indian students, when they go, they do very well. Only thing that they need is exposure, which I think is taking place now. What exposure a student gets today is much more than what we used to get when we were students. So with exposure and confidence in yourself, I think you can conquer the world. So that is my advice to the students.
One final question. This is more a general question again. See, many a time, quite a good number of students approach me saying that they want to do PhD, but unfortunately they are not in the physics stream, they are engineering students. While the national institutes in India, they encourage non-physics major students to come to PhD in physics, a good majority of the universities do not encourage them because our system is so rigid. I would personally feel that, like in US and Western countries, anybody wants to do research in physics, we should encourage them and help them to bridge the gaps one way or other by supporting and developing courses. So how do you think, what should we do? How do we make a change in our outlook of the so-called administrators to allow non-physics students also to come into physics if they are interested? So what do you say about that?
No, I completely agree with you. I can give you an example. P.A.M. Dirac, who actually is one of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics, he was an electrical engineer, and there are many other examples of that, because electrical engineers by their training know mathematics sometimes better than physicists. So I think and so there are examples, and there are even in India I have a colleague of mine who is a renowned particle physicist who was actually an electrical engineer in IIT Kharagpur. Then he changed over to physics. He went to USA, did his PhD and came back. So like that, we should have some courses for students who are coming from other areas, doing their masters in other areas. So they need to maybe brush up a few more courses. Some of the attempts are already there in some of these institutes, a few of them, even IITs are thinking of that. But that we should do it more generally, we should do it in the universities. That way our curriculum should be a little bit more flexible. We should have some optional courses which the students can take. Of course, some student who wants to come to do spend his life in research in physics, of course will not mind taking a 6-month or a 1-year course to learn basics of physics. So, that I think is very possible. Only thing is we may have to change our outlook, and we have to change our curriculum to some extent, and we should of course teach them well. That is finally the most important point.
I completely agree with you. There is one more point. See, again, our appointment and selections to most of the faculty positions are so rigid. They insist on basic qualification in physics, Emmrc physics, if you consider any lecturership or a teaching position. I think there also needs to be a change, because once a student who qualifies for a PhD in program, I personally feel there is no reason to insist upon what his earlier qualification or her earlier qualification was. So, in that context, what will be your advice? How do we go about bringing this change? Because I am finding it very difficult to turn back the students. No, I cannot take you, knowingly that they are extremely good students. I had to, in my own experience, move earth and heaven to take one student who did his BTech in engineering and wanted to do in astrophysics his PhD. So, finally somehow I was able to manage it, but in general it cannot be done. There must be a general rule which should be allowed, saying that any student who wants to do PhD in any branch can do, provided some bridge courses are done. What is your advice on that?
Yeah, what you point out is a very important thing. It is not only the courses changing, but also the criteria the university set or the institute set also has to change. Otherwise, this poor student who does his PhD suddenly finds that he is not eligible to get a job in colleges or in the university. So, these rules should be more flexible. UGC should seriously look at that problem and try to make it more open, so that the whole idea of attracting the best brains wherever they are, whether they are in science or engineering, does matter, but let them come and do in a free atmosphere, do as much as they can, and that, I think that in the long run will really make this thing vibrant and successful.
Thank you, Professor Kar, for your enlightening instructions and explaining all the recent trends. Thank you once again.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, welcome to this class on art history. Today, we will focus on a very significant and revolutionary modern art movement, Dadaism. Dada was an artistic movement which appeared during the First World War period. It began in 1916 in Zurich, Switzerland. It was a natural reaction to the atrocities of World War I and ridiculed nationalism and the so-called civilization of humankind which caused such a disastrous war. It ridiculed the history of culture. But still, a learner of art history can trace influences of earlier art movements like Cubism, Futurism, Constructivism, and Expressionism in Dadaism. Dada movement was not restricted to Zurich. It was an international movement. Dada groups were active in major cities in Europe and America, including Berlin, New York, Cologne, and Paris. During First World War, Switzerland remained a neutral nation. It attracted artists and intellectuals from all over the European continent and provided them refuge. Dada was anti-war and self-negating. It was also anti-art. Dada movement began in February 1916. It was at Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, a nightclub owned by artist Hugo Ball. The cabaret was named after the 18th century French satirist Voltaire, whose play Candide mocked the idiocies of a society. An informal group of artists and intellectuals gathered at the club, and they held readings of written works, displayed artworks, made discussions, and staged performances. In the beginning, their focus was on expressing anger over the war. Later, it attacked systems which are attached to society, including art establishment. They named the movement Dada. The word appears in different cultures with different meaning. It may mean a hobby horse, a nurse for children, tale of a sacred cow, a cube, and mother. It is also a sound an infant makes when it learns to speak. Richard Helsenbeck, a member of Dada group, claimed that he found the name by plunging a knife at random into a dictionary. Hugo Ball presented by recital the first Dada manifesto in July 14, 1916. In it, he stated, "Dada is a new tendency in art. Dada comes from the dictionary. It is terribly simple. In French, it means hobby horse. In German, it means goodbye, get off my back, be seeing you sometime. In Romanian, yes, indeed, you are right, that's it, but of course, yes, definitely, right." How does this one achieve eternal bliss? By saying Dada. How does one become famous? By saying Dada. With a noble gesture and delicate propriety, till one goes crazy, till one loses consciousness. How can one get rid of everything that smacks of journalism, worms, everything nice and right, blinkered, moralistic, Europeanized, innovated by saying Dada? Dada is the world soul. Dada is the pawn shop. Dada is the world's best lily milk soap. Some historians believe that Dada movement evolved out of a similar artistic attitude prevalent in Eastern Europe, especially in Romania. Migrant artists from Romania influenced the formation of Dadaist aesthetics. It is to be remembered that Tristan Tzara, the most active member of Dada, was from Romania. He was a poet, essayist, and performance artist. Hugo Ball, Emmy Hennings, Tristan Tzara, Jean Arp, Marcel Janko, Richard Helsenbeck, Sophie Tauber, and Hans Richter were part of the Zurich Dada movement. Marcel Janko wrote, "We had lost confidence in our culture. Everything had to be demolished. We would begin again after the tabula rasa. At the Cabaret Voltaire, we begin by shocking common sense, public opinion, education, institutions, museums, good taste, in short, the whole prevailing order." Dadaists also began to spread their ideas through publications. They were able to bring out a journal, Cabaret Voltaire. It was the first publication to come out of the movement. Only a single issue of the magazine was published. The cafe was closed down in 1916. Hugo Ball presented by recital the first Dada manifesto in 1916. In it, he said, Tristan Tzara wrote a second Dada manifesto in 1918. It is considered as one of the most important Dada writings. Zurich Dadaists, with Tzara at the leadership, published the Art and Literature Review, Dada, beginning in July 1917, with 5 editions from Zurich and the final 2 from Paris. By the end of the First World War, most of the Zurich Dadaists returned to their home countries and some moved to the other cities. Richard Helsenbeck, a member of Zurich Dada group, returned to Berlin in 1917. He delivered his first Dada speech in Germany in 1918 at I.B. Neumann's Gallery in Berlin. Hausmann, Helsenbeck, George Gross, John Herdfield, Jung, Hirsch, Walter Mehring, and Bader started the club Dada and began to closely associate. The first event they organized was an evening of poetry performances and lectures against the backdrop of a retrospective of paintings by Louis Corinth at the Berlin session of 1918. Hülsenberg recited the Dada Manifesto, Gross danced the jazz, and Haussmann shouted his manifesto, the new material in painting. The audience were shocked and went almost riotous. The Dada movement in Berlin was much more political in its approach, maybe because the artists in Berlin were very near to where the war was happening, unlike Zurich and New York. Dada Manifesto of 1918, Berlin, by Hülsenberg stated, Expressionism wanted inwardness. It conceived of itself as a reaction against the times, while Dadaism is nothing but an expression of the times. Dada is one with the times. It is a child of the present epoch which one may curse but cannot deny. Expressionism is not spontaneous action. It is the gesture of tired people who wish to escape themselves and forget the present, the war and the misery. Artists like George Gross had clear political standpoint and expressed it through his art. The Berlin group published periodicals such as Club Dada, Der Dada, Every Man His Own Football, and Dada Almanac. In 1920, they organized the first international Dada fair. Max Ernst is attributed with the founding of Cologne branch of Dada. In Cologne, Ernst, Bargeld, and Opp organized a Dada exhibition in 1920, which focused on anti-bourgeois sentiments. Cologne's early spring exhibition landed in controversy and police intervention on grounds of obscenity. The first introduction of Dada artwork to the Parisian public was at the Salon des Indépendants in 1921. Jean Crotti exhibited works associated with Dada, including a work entitled Explicatif bearing the word taboo. Zara staged his Dadaist play, The Gas Hut, also in 1921. It was again staged in 1923 as a professional production, and a group of audience under the initiative of Andrew Breton created a theatre ride. The last Dadaist drama by Zara was Handkerchief of Clouds in 1924. In New York, Marcel Duchamp and Francis Picabia were creating Dadaist works from 1915, the year they came to America. To the people of New York, Duchamp and Picabia were not strangers when they arrived at the New York art scene. Duchamp's nude descending down the staircase and Picabia's procession as Zivele were shown in 1913 at Emmrc show. They, together with other European migrants, Albert Gleizes, Jean Crotti, Henri Pere-Roger, Arthur Craven, Edgar Varese, and Americans Morton Schamberg, Walter Pack, John Cowart, Arthur Doe, and most importantly, Man Ray, sensationalized the American art scene by their Dada artworks and performances. Alfred Stieglitz's 291 Gallery was a center for their gatherings. Sense of irony and humor were more apparent in New York Dada art than in their European counterpart. They did not have a manifesto, but used instead publications such as The Blind Man, Wrong, and New York Dada to criticize the traditional basis of museum art. Duchamp returned to France in 1923. He settled permanently in America in 1942. Dada art varies so widely that it is difficult to identify stylistic features. Dada itself was against a coherent style. Even then, one can find traces of Cubism, Futurism, and Expressionism in it. Dada intentionally tries to shock the audience. It uses ridicule, nonsense, puns, and irony. Mild obscenities occur in some Dada works. The glorification of mass production was an idea of futurists, but it was the Dada artists who exhibited everyday commonplace mass-produced objects as ready-made art. They have introduced the concept of chance, and this was taken up later by Surrealism. Like the synthetic cubists, Dadais also used paper collage and assemblage. Dada introduced the idea of performance art and process art, but because Dada was against to follow any non-rules, it was against its own manifestos. But it can be seen that automatism was a suggested starting point of a Dada creation. It proposed the notion of a vitality without any preconceived subject. Dada challenged the preconceived notion of an identifiable artistic style. Dada was not confined to the visual art, its influence reached into literature, music, theatre, etc. Dada music composed by Francis Picabia and Ribemont Designs was performed at the festival Dada in Paris 1920. Many Dadais created phonetic poetry, that is, poems with high-sounding, meaningless rhythms and recited them as performance. One of the first instances of Dada performance art and sound poetry recital happened on the evening of June 23, 1916. Hugo Ball was carried to the stage of the Cabaret Voltaire by some of his friends. He was dressed in a cardboard suit. There he recited an absurd high-sounding poem named Caravan. Dadais were always in the lookout for new creative means to challenge tradition. They challenged the usage of traditional media like oil paintings on canvas. They have experimented with various media like collage, photomontage, assemblage, ready-made and photography. Synthetic cubism experimented with the potential of collage medium even before Dada came into being. But Dada usage of the medium was different. For example, Jean-Arp tore up colored paper into small squares and allowed them to freely fall into a glued sheet of colored paper, thus creating a collage. This may appear to be an absurd method of creating an artwork, but challenging what art was considered to be was one of the aims of Dada. The act of creation also became important. Now, after a century, we are seeing a resurgence in performance art. The process also intended to be automatic. The artist does not aim for the final result, the process creates the end result. Usage of chance happening was a Dada way of ridiculing reason. The conscious control of reason made the world what it is. The absence of reason opened up a path for subconscious to act. It even negated the authority of the personality of the artist himself. Using collage also included using everyday found objects such as tickets, maps, calendars, candy cars. These experiments broke down the barrier between high and low art. Later movements like pop art took up the idea and extended it. It was also a statement in waste production and its recycling. The work Picture with Spatial Growths or Picture with Two Small Dogs by Kurt Schwister uses an assemblage of oil, papers, board, fabric, wood, hair, ceramic and metal on board. The collage technique was also used to write poetry. Dadais used the cut-up technique as a literary technique in which a text is cut up and rearranged to create a new text. Cut-up is performed by taking a finished and fully linear text and cutting in pieces with a few or single words on each piece. The resulting pieces are then rearranged into a new text. This method was later adapted by Surrealism and some contemporary artists. Incorporation of chants into the process of creation, especially the creation of art or media, is known as eleuthericisim. The most controversial and famous example of the usage of popular printed media is the work by Marcel Duchamp titled LHOOQ. It was created in 1919. Pencil was used to draw a moustache on a cheap postcard reproduction of Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. The name of the piece was also Shocking Obscene Pun. When it is read aloud in French, it becomes an obscene pun. Duchamp went even further to reinvent himself as Rose Salavi, a pseudo-personality. The name also sounds like a French word which, when translated from French to English, means a rose. Mandry, one of the great masters of Dadaist art, photographed Duchamp dressed as Rose Salavi. Duchamp titled one of his works done in 1921 as Why Not Sneeze, Rose Salavi. This work is now in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Duchamp termed it to be an assisted ready-made. An assisted ready-made is an object altered by the artist by slightly altering it or assisting its context as an artwork by the addition of other objects. Duchamp himself had made several replicas of this work. Duchamp also used the pseudonym Rose Salavi to sign several of his creations. Another pseudo-personality he invented out himself was Richard Mudd. Richard Mudd appeared chronologically earlier than Rose Salavi. Duchamp used this name to sign one of his most non-ready-mades, The Fountain. The original of the work is now lost. The replicas found in museums were commissioned by Duchamp himself after 1960s. The Fountain was a bold statement in the 20th century art. It shows how the spectator alters the meaning of an object by reading its context. The beautifully designed object, created by a team of experts, meticulously created out of durable ceramic, becomes a lowly placed object just because of the function associated with it. Duchamp submitted this ready-made object for the exhibition of the Society of Independent Artists in 1917. It was, of course, got rejected. The Fountain was exhibited in Alfred Stieglitz's studio. A learner of art should be careful to study Duchamp's work in relation to Dadaism as a historical movement. While studying Dadaism as a movement, one should analyze its history very closely and its manifestos. Hans Richter, an original member of the Zurich Dada group, describes Duchamp as Neo-Dada. Some historians suggest that Dada as a movement originated, influenced by earlier experiments by people like Alfred Jarry, Guilaine Apollinaire, Jacques Vacher, Marcel Duchamp, and Francis Picabia. This has become controversial because of its political implication. Neo-Dada is a label applied primarily to audio and visual art that has similarities in method or intent to earlier Dada artwork. The term became popular in the 1960s. Neo-Dada is also used to describe the Fluxus group in Germany. Its members include Joseph Beuys and Jens Klein, John Cage, etc. They too explored media ranging from performance art to poetry to experimental music. Opposed to tradition and professionalism in the arts, the Fluxus group shifted the emphasis from the artwork to artists' personality, actions, and opinions. They staged action events, engaged in political actions, and created installations featuring unconventional found materials. Dadaism was an unconventional movement which changed the course of art history. Its aim was to go beyond the conventions of traditional art and even experimentation in art. Its real worth goes beyond the visual appearance or shock value of the artworks it left behind. To understand the significance of Dadaism, one has to study the course art history has taken after Dadaism. Now, it is time we conclude this session. Till our next session, bye.
Hello and welcome to this session, Counseling Process. To understand counseling process, it is essential to understand the goal of counseling clearly. The goal of counseling is not the resolution of an immediate problem, but to help the person move towards increasing maturity and self-direction. Based on this assumption, counseling can be best interpreted as a systematic process in which many broad functions can be identified. This chapter tries to understand the essential stages and functions of the counselor-counselee relationship, or in other words, the counseling process. Though it is difficult to empirically differentiate the different stages of the process, it is useful creating a conceptual distinction over different stages and functions of counseling process. A typical counseling process starts with the identification of the problems and proceeds through offering help for client to create a course of action, solve the problems identified, and is often followed with proper follow-up program. The following discussion introduces each of the steps involved in counseling process and the task involved in each of them. Determining the problem. Counseling, as we mentioned earlier, is a personalized service which is directed towards the resolution of individual problems. In that sense, it is a problem-centered technique, and thus the first step in counseling is the precise understanding of the problem. Such an understanding serves a dual purpose. It serves time and effort in later counseling, and it serves to focus attention on the conditions relevant to the problem. In a classroom situation, teacher is the best person who can identify the presence of problems among pupils. Not all problems need counseling. There are certain problems that fall beyond the competence of a teacher. Only such problems need specialized help from the counselor. The most common classroom problem is conduct problem. It can vary from mild behavior maladjustment to serious maladjustment. The common manifestations of conduct problem are constant conflict with others, unhappiness, nervousness, anxiety, disobedience, etc. The more serious forms include delinquency, stealing, and behavior that will result in physical harming of other people in the environment. The counseling process starts with the interview, where the counselor tries to get at the nature of the problem. If the counselee has expressed interest in the counseling process, things would be easier. But usually in the stages, the client shows significant amount of resistance and might not be cooperating with the interview process. Such moments requires careful interventions from the counselor, where the focus will be on winning the client's trust. Once the rapport is established, the client will describe the problems freely, and the counselor is supposed to facilitate the process without interfering it. Counselor can facilitate the process through nodding and other gestures that assure his or empathy for the client. The initial description of the problem is an important source of data, and the counselor is supposed to record it verbatim, if possible. The vocabulary used by the client in the statement of the problem and subsequent thoughts and feelings expressed about it helps to offer a clue to the problem. Establishing proper conditions. To take forward the interview to the next level, the counselor should establish proper conditions that would facilitate dialogue. This include physical setting of the room to the trust and warmth of the relationship. The room of counseling should be comfortable with proper lights and seating arrangements, and it should provide adequate privacy to talk private and intimate matters. The counselor should provide genuinely friendly reception. This can make both the parties at ease. The counselor should not probe unnecessary facts and should make the feeling of probing within client's mind. The process should be participatory, where the decision-making powers of the client is valued, respected and facilitated. The time limit of the session should be properly communicated beforehand and should be strictly followed. Counselors should always facilitate conversations through avoiding direct questions and employing kindness and open-mindedness. The counselor should not take the statement of the client for face value and should keep some distance from the picture presented before him or her. The counselor should not offer help over the issues where he or she cannot really intervene. Selecting methods. Based on the data collected through the initial round of interviews and other data collection methods, the counselor makes a decision over the methods that can be employed in the counseling process. Adapting a particular counseling method may mean many things. It will depend upon the skill, expertise and preference of the counselor, and more than all of these, the nature of the perceived problem will determine the approach. There are many practical considerations that must be evaluated. Planning assistance for an individual should be geared to the requirements of the problem. The task: facilitating expression. The client should be encouraged to express his feelings, preferably in relation to a topic familiar to him. He needs to be reassured as to his freedom to express his feelings without any hindrance. In order to encourage self-expression, the counselor should respond in a way which indicates recognition and acceptance of the feeling or attitude immediately underlying the client's statements. The creation of a positive counseling relationship depends heavily on the recognition from the counselor's part of the deeper feeling and emotions expressed by the client. The counselor should give due respect to the emotions expressed by the client and is not supposed to belittle the emotions. In order to facilitate expressions, a counselor is supposed to begin where the client is, assisting clarification. The first point for the counselor to concede is the client's right to make his own decisions. A counselor can allow this concession only if he or she empathizes with the client. Empathy is the ability to put oneself in the other person's shoes, the ability to feel as he feels, believe as he or she believes, fear what he or she fears, and need what he or she needs. But empathy does not mean the counselor can make a decision for the client. However clearly the counselor interprets or understands a client's issues, problems, and state of mind, the counselor is not supposed to take a decision for the client. Instead, an ideal counselor always tries to clarify the problem for the client. The assessment given by counselor of the problem will be different from that of the counselee. Is the experienced conflict real or imaginary? How much importance does the client attach to his or her own experience? These questions are psychological rather than logical and have a greater influence on finding out what is the real issue that is waiting to be addressed. There exist some standard methods that would help to understand the real issues that are brought into the counseling process. Keeping to reality, this implies that the counselor reacts in such a way as to facilitate the client's coming to terms with the many wishes and fears that are brought to bear on a specific problem of the individual. Selection a critical facet of the problem. The counselor must help the counselee focus on the more critical aspects of the client's inner life. If he can do so, he can thereby successfully limit the problem to a point where both counselor and counselee can understand it in its proper perspective. To accomplish his purpose, the counselor must help the client to establish greater intellectual control over his impulses, giving more cognitive emphasis to interaction. The counseling relationship is a relationship which tends to become emotionally loaded and too diffuse to arrive at concrete action, plans and clear perception of the issues. To avoid such a situation, the counselor must give preference to cognitive aspects of the interaction. Clarification of conditions of the interview is a prerequisite of solving the problem which initially brought about the interview. Counselor here tries to provide a clearer picture of the problem where the client's own subjective investment in the problem is foregrounded. This in no way includes decision making. This is only a reorganization of the data presented to the counselor. Through the interview, the counselor and counselee should try to arrive at a consensus over the problems at hand, the possible and realistic solution for it. Assembling and interpreting information. The counselor should take note of the nature and the direction of the interview along with the data presented in the interview. He or she is supposed to take notes if that process won't affect the interview. It is useful to record the initial impression of the client. This record usually contains the in condensed form of counselor's observation and impressions about the client's behavior. This information can be used later to make some tentative hypothesis regarding the future behavior of the client. Important aspects of the interview need to be recorded as soon as the interview is over. Referral needs to be made in order to learn whether or not the client has carried out his part of program which has been mutually agreed upon. The counselor will often find it desirable to obtain additional information whereby he can verify some of the data he has been given. Information can also be entered on regular forms standardized as to headings, forms if desired. Counseling records are not mere logical or rational records. They must include the individual responses with respect to aspirations, feelings, beliefs and value system. This record helps to see the process in a different light, the progress made, the problems recurring and the positive aspects of the communication. Developing action plan. Development of an action plan requires a thorough interpretation of the data available. To interpret is to go beyond what has been expressed by the counselee and all other data collected from biographical history tests, scores, etc. Meaning must be given to the data collected, but giving meaning to the collected data is not a task restricted to the counselor alone. It is a process of generating a mutually agreeable reading of the given material. Since the goal of counseling is to help the counselee develop insight regarding the crisis so that he or she will be equipped greatly to resolve it better. In that sense, comprehension of the interpretation from the part of the counselee is important. If there is consensus over the interpretation, the situation is greatly simplified. But if there is significant difference over interpretations, many problems can arise. An interpretation generated through mutual participation results in better integration of the emotional and intellectual aspects of the client. Forms, charts, diagrams and other devices are sometimes useful to help both the counselor and the counselee first to collect information systematically and then to arrange, discard and rearrange ideas until they begin to focus on acceptance or a conclusion. Interpretation can be classified into two types. Interpreting as objectively and kindly as possible the meaning of each separate or unitary item of data is the first method. Second method tries to generalize and integrate each separately evaluated information clusters as it is added to the total study of the person. The first method tries to focus on the specificities of the personality, and in the second method he is helped to relate one specific insight to another and all into a total life pattern. The more accurate the interpretation and the more willing the client is to accept or integrate, it will result in better self-concept and better adjustment. If there are emotional blocks to acceptance of new meanings, new experiences or synthesis of collected information, development and application of plans are delayed until the client is able to gain insight and take positive steps. Once the new interpretation of the old situation is in place, half of the counseling job is successfully resolved. But this new interpretation will not be accepted smoothly. Responding to an old stimulus in a new way is anxiety generating for many. Counseling processor here tries to help the client come out of such anxieties and learn new ways of coping with the old stimuli so that what is perceived as crisis is no longer crisis. There are no general or standardized formats of course of action, and it varies with client to client and from situation to situation. But there are some general qualities that are desirable to any course of action. Flexibility and adaptability are two such qualities. Patience and understanding are the other two important qualities that are required for the successful course action. An empathic counselor can extend assurance to the client while he or she is going through a significant change in perceiving and acting on the environment. Creativity is another important determinant of the implementation of successful course of action, where our creativity helps to come up with unconventional solution to the conventional problems. Summary and follow-up. After a plan of action has been determined, further assistance may need to be provided. Temporarily, the assistance may amount to reassurance or it may be that of referral. In making any provision for further counseling, the counselor does so on the basis of what has thus far been developed out of his work with the client. The success of counseling can only be determined through long-term assessment. It can be measured against the experienced sense of achievement and resolution from the part of the client. The counselee should not consider his presently stated plans to be absolutely final. This is necessary to foster flexibility and to keep an open mind towards possibilities of further growth. The termination of counseling is an important decision that should be taken by the counselor and counselee together. The counselee should be reassured that the counseling service will be available upon request. This assurance should not be misunderstood to mean that the counselee should become dependent on the counselor. Clients need to grow both in understanding and self-direction. The knowledge that they can return for further assistance in trouble works at a psychological level through ensuring security. One important aspect of counseling services in school is the keeping of records. Counseling is a systematic process, and so are the records. The record should be structured, objective, and should include some important information regarding the client in a verifiable form. The counselor is supposed to keep comprehensive summary of the interactions, interventions, and results achieved through it for further reference. During the termination of the counseling service, a summary of the report can be prepared for quick reference later. Counseling is a continuous process, and even though there may be long interruption and delays, the case may be opened again at any time by the same counselor other than the one who originally accepted the responsibility for counseling. Nature and contents of such records have an important influence on the counseling is conducted. Each counselee deserves to have a minimum report be placed in his or her file. In the long run, records help to avoid duplication of effort and facilitate focused thinking. Each report should use vocabulary and style appropriate to the level of the intended reader. Follow-up of an individual ensures the continuity of the counseling process. It assures the counselee that the counselor is interested in him. It must, however, be done in such a way that the counselee does not feel that someone is checking upon him. Rather, it should imply to him that the counselor door is always open. Follow-up should be planned with care and should be implemented systematically. It helps to understand the strength and weakness of the counseling program. In that sense, follow-up program helps both the individual counselee and the institutional program of counseling. Follow-up is a valuable method for evaluating the practices. Let us summarize what we have discussed so far. The goal of counseling is not the resolution of an immediate problem, but to help the person move towards increasing maturity and self-direction. Based on this assumption, counseling can be best interpreted as a systematic process in which many broad functions can be identified. It is essential to understand the stages and functions of the counselor-counselee relationship, or in other words, the counseling process to understand counseling. Though it is difficult to empirically differentiate the different stages of the process, it is useful creating a conceptual distinction over different stages and functions of counseling process. A typical counseling process starts with the identification of the problems and proceeds through offering help for the client to create a course of action, solve the problems identified, and is often followed with proper follow-up program. Now try to answer the given questions. What are the common problems that need intervention from counseling? What are the proper conditions that would take forward counseling relationship? How to select a method with respect to counseling process? How to evolve an action plan? What is the importance of record keeping in counseling? What are the different steps involved in counseling process? What are the tasks involved in counseling process? What is the importance of follow-up in counseling? Here are some books for your reference. Guidance in Today's School by Motson G. Donald and Skimmeler Ellen, published by John Wiley & Sons, New York. Guidance in Classroom by Strang Ruth and Maurice Glynn, published by Collier and Macmillan Limited, London. Thank you for watching this program. We will meet again with another topic. Until then, take care. Goodbye.